La mujer apache, salvé me ofreció a su hija como esposa. The protagonist, a man used to traveling alone through remote regions, walked carefully, keeping an eye on the rough terrain. His boots crunched over small stones, and every so often he paused to listen to the sounds of the land. Birds called in the distance, and the wind whispered through the sparse trees. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but he had learned that in the wilderness, silence could be more dangerous than noise. As he moved along the trail, he noticed signs of life, a trail of footprints, the remains of a small fire and broken twigs scattered along the path. Something was unusual. He slowed his pace, scanning the area with caution. Suddenly, a sound broke the calm, a cry for help. It was soft at first, almost lost in the wind, but urgent enough to make him stop immediately. He strained his ears and followed the sound. After a few minutes, he saw her, a woman, struggling to free herself from a tangle of ropes that bound her hands and feet. Her clothes were torn and her face was smudged with dirt and tears. She looked exhausted and terrified, but her eyes held a spark of determination. Without hesitation, he approached carefully, making sure not to startle her. "I'm here to help," he said calmly, trying to sound reassuring. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. He could see the pain in her expression, but also a sense of relief that someone had finally arrived. Kneeling down, he examined the knots that held her. They were tight and cruelly tied, but he had experience with such things. Slowly and carefully, he began to untangle the ropes, his fingers working efficiently to avoid hurting her. The woman watched him intently, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. After what felt like an eternity, the ropes finally fell away and she rubbed her wrists, grateful for the freedom. She looked at him, trying to speak, but no words came out at first. Tears streamed down her cheeks and she whispered a quiet, heartfelt thank you. The protagonist nodded, offering a small smile. "You're safe now," he said. "Can you walk?" She nodded slowly, her legs weak but determined. He helped her to her feet, steadying her as she regained her balance. Together, they moved a few steps away from the trail, finding a small shaded area under a cluster of trees. The sun was lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the coolness of the shade offered a brief relief from the heat of the day. As she sat down, the woman finally spoke, her voice trembling but firm. She explained that she had been captured by a group that sought to harm her, and that she had been trying to escape for hours. She spoke in broken sentences, but the message was clear. The protagonist listened carefully, understanding that every word carried weight. He offered her water from his canteen and encouraged her to drink slowly. Her hands shook as she took it, but gradually she began to regain her composure. The protagonist noticed that she was wearing simple, practical clothes, suited for life in the wilderness. Her hair was long and dark, falling in loose waves over her shoulders. Despite her exhaustion, there was a strength in her posture, a resilience that spoke of years of surviving hardships. He realized that she was not only a survivor but also a person with deep courage. He felt a mix of admiration and responsibility. Saving her was not just about freeing her from the ropes. It was about ensuring that she could get back to safety and that she knew someone cared enough to help. He asked her name, and she hesitated for a moment before answering. There was a brief moment of silence, filled only by the sounds of the wind and distant birds. He respected her pause, knowing that trust was not given easily. Finally, she said her name softly. He introduced himself in return, keeping his tone gentle and reassuring. There was an unspoken understanding between them. He had helped her, but now it was important to listen and understand her story. He knew that in situations like this, patience was as important as courage. After a while, she began to tell him more about where she lived and the path she had been forced to take. He listened closely, piecing together the geography of the area and the dangers she had faced. She spoke of the harshness of the terrain, the sudden changes in weather, and the loneliness of being on her own. Each detail painted a vivid picture of her struggle, and the protagonist felt a growing respect for her endurance. It was clear that she had faced challenges far greater than he could have imagined, and yet she had not given up. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the land, he realized that nightfall would soon come. They needed to find a safe place to rest. He suggested moving toward a nearby village that he knew from his travels, assuring her that she would be safe there. She agreed, though cautiously, and together they started walking slowly, taking care not to move too quickly on the uneven ground. The walk was quiet at first, each lost in their thoughts, but gradually she began to share small stories of her life, her family, and the customs of her people. He listened intently, learning not only about her struggles but also about the richness of her culture. The bond between them began to form naturally. It was not romantic or forced. It was built on trust, respect, and the shared experience of danger. The protagonist realized that sometimes, helping someone could lead to profound connections that transcended words. The woman, in turn, began to see him as more than a stranger. He was someone who had risked his safety for hers, and in her eyes, that was a rare and valuable quality. She smiled faintly for the first time since he had found her, and he felt a small but significant sense of accomplishment. By the time they reached the outskirts of the village, the sky had turned deep blue and stars were beginning to appear. They found a modest shelter where she could rest, and he made sure she was comfortable before saying he would return in the morning to check on her. She nodded gratefully, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and trust. As he walked away under the starlit sky, he reflected on the day's events. What had begun as a routine journey through the mountains had turned into an encounter that tested his courage, patience, and empathy. He understood that sometimes the smallest acts of bravery, simply being there when someone needed help, could change lives. That night, as he camped under the open sky, he thought about the woman he had helped. He wondered how she would fare and what challenges she would face next. Yet, there was a quiet hope in his heart that she would find safety and continue to live her life with the same strength she had shown during their brief encounter. The mountains, silent and majestic, seemed to watch over them both, a reminder that the world was full of danger, yes, but also of courage, kindness, and human connection. And so, part one ended not with a dramatic conclusion, but with the quiet triumph of compassion. The knowledge that in a harsh and unforgiving world, even small acts of courage could make a difference, and that trust, once earned, could form bonds that might last a lifetime. Morning sun rose slowly over the rugged hills, spilling warm golden light across the village. The protagonist woke early, careful not to disturb the sleeping villagers. The night had been quiet, but his mind was alive with thoughts of the woman he had helped. He wondered how she had spent the night, whether she had managed to rest, and whether she felt safer now that the immediate danger had passed. With a sense of responsibility, he made his way to the modest shelter where she had stayed, hoping to find her awake. When he arrived, he saw her sitting outside, her face illuminated by the soft morning light. She was tying her hair back neatly, a small smile playing on her lips as she noticed him. The relief in her eyes warmed him, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had begun to form. "Good morning," he greeted gently, careful not to startle her. She nodded and returned the greeting. It was a small exchange, but it carried a depth of understanding that words could not fully capture. He noticed that she had already begun gathering water and preparing a simple meal. Her movements were careful, deliberate, and skilled. It was clear that she was used to taking care of herself and managing in difficult circumstances. He offered to help, but she shook her head politely. "I can manage," she said softly, a hint of pride in her tone. The protagonist respected her independence, understanding that helping someone did not always mean taking over their responsibilities. Sometimes it meant simply being there when needed and giving them space to regain their strength. After breakfast, they began walking together along a path that led deeper into the village. The villagers, curious but respectful, watched them pass. Children peeked from behind wooden fences, and elders nodded silently in acknowledgement. The protagonist noticed that the woman moved with confidence, despite her recent ordeal. She explained that the village was small but close-knit, where everyone knew one another and looked out for each other. It was a community shaped by resilience, tradition, and mutual care. He listened intently, fascinated by the way people had adapted to life in a challenging environment. As they walked, she shared more of her story. Her family had faced numerous hardships, from harsh weather to limited resources, but they had always relied on each other for support. She spoke of her childhood, of learning to hunt, gather, and navigate the rugged landscape. She described the lessons her parents had taught her, how to stay calm under pressure, how to respect the land, and how to value honesty and hard work above all else. The protagonist was impressed by her knowledge and maturity. Despite her youth, she carried the wisdom of someone who had faced adversity and survived with integrity. They reached a small clearing where the woman paused, looking around thoughtfully. "This is where I often come to think," she said quietly. "When things feel too heavy, I sit here and let the wind carry my worries away." The protagonist nodded, understanding the need for quiet reflection. They sat together on a fallen log, the morning breeze gently rustling the leaves above them. For a few moments there was silence, but it was not uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with mutual respect and unspoken understanding. He could feel her strength, and she could sense his willingness to listen without judgment. As they talked more, the protagonist began to notice the subtle ways in which she expressed gratitude. She did not lavish praise or exaggerate her thanks. Instead, her appreciation was quiet, thoughtful, and sincere. She spoke of the relief she had felt when he appeared to help her, and how that moment had reminded her that there were still people in the world willing to act with kindness and courage. He was touched by her words, but also reminded that true acts of bravery were often simple. They did not require recognition or reward. Helping someone in need, he realized, was its own reward. Over the next few days, their bond continued to grow. The protagonist helped her with daily tasks, walking alongside her as she fetched water, gathered food, and tended to small chores. They shared stories, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. He began to understand the rhythm of her life and the resilience it demanded. She, in turn, seemed to trust him more with each passing day. He noticed that she would look to him for guidance in uncertain situations, but always retained her independence. It was a delicate balance of trust and respect, one that strengthened their connection without crossing boundaries. During one of their walks, she took him to a nearby river. The water was clear and cool, flowing gently over smooth stones. She knelt by the edge, washing her hands and face, and gestured for him to do the same. He followed her example, feeling the refreshing coolness of the water against his skin. As they stood side by side, she began to talk about the traditions of her people, the ceremonies, the songs, and the lessons passed down from generation to generation. The protagonist listened with genuine interest, fascinated by the richness of a culture so different from his own. He asked questions respectfully, and she answered with patience, appreciating his willingness to learn. One afternoon, as they rested under the shade of a large oak tree, the woman looked at him with a serious expression. "I want you to understand something," she said. "In our way of life, gratitude is shown through actions, not just words. When someone helps you, it is important to honor that help in the ways we know." The protagonist nodded, sensing that she was about to share something significant. She paused, then added, "You have helped me in a way that is rare. I want to make sure that your kindness is remembered." He waited quietly, not pressing for details, knowing that some things required careful thought and cultural understanding. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the woman invited him to sit by a small fire she had prepared. The warmth of the flames reflected in her eyes as she spoke softly about her family, her hopes, and her fears. She explained that life in the village was not easy, but it was rich in connection, tradition, and shared responsibility. The protagonist felt honored that she trusted him with these personal insights. He realized that their relationship had moved beyond a simple act of rescue. It had become a meaningful connection built on mutual respect and understanding. As night fell, the protagonist reflected on the days spent with her. He thought about the challenges she had faced and the resilience she had shown. He realized that helping someone was not just about physical action. It was about empathy, patience, and the willingness to learn from each other. Their growing trust was fragile but genuine, and he knew that the bond they were forming could have lasting significance. He felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that his presence had made a difference in her life, even in small ways. Before parting for the night, the woman handed him a small token, a simple woven bracelet. "This is a sign of trust," she said quietly. "It is a way to show that what we share matters and that it will be remembered." He accepted it with gratitude, understanding the symbolic importance. It was not just a gift. It was a bridge between two lives, two cultures, and two hearts trying to understand each other in a vast and challenging world. As he lay under the stars, he thought about how extraordinary this encounter had been. He had expected a simple journey through the wilderness, but instead, he had found himself immersed in a story of courage, culture, and human connection. The woman's resilience, wisdom, and quiet strength had left a deep impression on him. He knew that the days ahead would bring more challenges, but he also knew that they would navigate them together, guided by mutual respect and a growing bond of trust. And so, Part 2 closed on a note of careful optimism. The protagonist and the woman had begun to understand each other beyond words, building a connection rooted in gratitude, respect, and shared humanity. The story was no longer just about rescue. It was about learning, growing, and discovering the depth of human kindness in a world that could often seem harsh and unforgiving. The days that followed were calm but filled with quiet learning. The protagonist continued to spend time with the woman he had helped, moving carefully through her village and learning about the daily routines, the culture, and the land. They walked along trails lined with scrub and rocks, the wind carrying the scent of the earth and distant flowers. Each step reminded him how far he had come, not just physically, but emotionally, into the world of people whose lives were shaped by courage, resilience, and tradition. One afternoon, as the sun hovered high in the sky, they returned from gathering water from a nearby stream. The woman led him to a small shaded area near her home where she paused, her expression thoughtful. "There is something I need to tell you," she said quietly, her eyes searching his for understanding. He sensed the seriousness in her tone and nodded, giving her space to speak. There was a quiet pause, broken only by the distant sound of children laughing and the soft rustle of the leaves. She began carefully, explaining that in her culture, gratitude is often shown in ways that may seem unusual to outsiders. She spoke of traditions passed down from her ancestors, rituals that express trust, respect, and the acknowledgement of a significant act of help. The protagonist listened intently, aware that this conversation required sensitivity, patience, and open-mindedness. He understood that he had entered a world with customs different from his own, and it was important to approach them without judgment. Then, she shared something that took him by surprise. In keeping with her people's customs, she had considered offering a way to honor the help he had given. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully, and finally said, "In our tradition, sometimes gratitude is shown by offering the hand of a family member in marriage." It is meant as a gesture of trust, respect, and alliance. The protagonist's eyes widened, and for a moment he could not speak. The words felt heavy, carrying centuries of culture, belief, and expectation. He paused, taking a deep breath to steady himself. This was unfamiliar territory, a crossroads between cultures, ethics, and personal responsibility. He realized that the offer was not meant as coercion, but as a sincere expression of gratitude and trust, grounded in a tradition he did not fully understand. The weight of the moment was profound, and he knew that his response would affect not only himself but also the woman, her family, and their cultural bonds. "I appreciate your trust," he said carefully, choosing his words with thought, "and I respect your culture deeply. But this is something I need to understand fully before responding. It is important to me that any decision honors both your traditions and my own sense of right." The woman nodded, her expression unreadable at first, then softening into a look of quiet respect. She had offered him something meaningful, and he had responded with consideration rather than dismissal. That acknowledgement alone strengthened the trust between them. Over the next few days, he took time to learn more about the customs and traditions of the community. He spoke with elders, listened to their stories, and asked questions with respect. He discovered that these gestures of gratitude were deeply symbolic, meant to solidify bonds between families and ensure mutual support. The more he learned, the more he understood that this offer was not simply about marriage. It was about respect, honor, and recognition of courage. This realization allowed him to view the situation with a broader perspective. As he spent time with the woman, he also observed her daughter, a young girl with bright eyes and a curious nature. She was cautious around him at first, but over time she warmed to his presence, drawn by his kindness and gentle demeanor. The protagonist made a conscious effort to interact respectfully, never overstepping boundaries, and always showing genuine interest in her life. He realized that part of respecting the culture meant treating everyone involved with care, understanding, and patience. One evening, the woman invited him to sit with her near the fire. The warmth of the flames reflected in their eyes as she spoke again of gratitude and tradition. "In offering my daughter," she said softly, "I am not asking for a decision today. It is a symbol, a way of showing that your actions mattered. It is up to you to understand, to reflect, and to decide what is right." The protagonist felt the gravity of her words. She was giving him both a gift and a responsibility, the gift of trust and the responsibility of making a choice that honored her culture and his own values. The protagonist spent the night reflecting under the stars, the sky stretching endlessly above him. He thought about the woman's courage, her kindness, and the trust she had placed in him. He considered the meaning of the offer and the cultural context behind it. He realized that the situation required more than a simple yes or no. It required understanding, respect, and wisdom. He could not act impulsively. He needed to find a solution that respected both her traditions and his own principles. In the days that followed, he approached the situation thoughtfully. He continued to help the woman and her family with daily tasks, while also spending time learning from elders about the customs and their deeper meanings. He asked about ways people had honored acts of bravery in the past, seeking guidance on how to respond appropriately. Each conversation added layers of understanding, showing him that culture was not rigid. It was alive, adaptable, and rooted in values like trust, respect, and community. Throughout this period, the bond between him and the woman deepened. It was no longer just about gratitude. It had become a connection built on shared experiences, trust, and mutual respect. She began to speak more freely about her hopes, dreams, and fears, and he listened without judgment. He learned about the challenges her people faced, limited resources, harsh weather, and the constant effort needed to maintain community harmony. In turn, he shared stories of his own life, of the journeys he had taken, and of the moments that had shaped him. Their conversations were filled with insight, empathy, and quiet laughter. Despite the unusual nature of the offer, the protagonist felt no pressure to respond immediately. He understood that respecting her culture also meant respecting his own boundaries and values. He could show gratitude, honor, and respect without making a decision that felt wrong to him. This realization gave him clarity and confidence. He decided that when the time came, he would respond thoughtfully, in a way that would honor both her family and himself. One afternoon, while walking near the edge of the village, the woman paused to point out a distant ridge. "Our ancestors believed that the mountains hold wisdom," she said. "When we are faced with difficult decisions, we climb, we observe, and we reflect. The land teaches patience and clarity." The protagonist felt the truth of her words. Just as the mountains endured storms and seasons, people endured challenges and decisions, growing stronger and wiser with each experience. He realized that the offer, like the mountains, was a test of understanding, patience, and respect. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, he and the woman sat by a small fire outside her home. The daughter played nearby, her laughter filling the air and reminding them both of the innocence and joy that life could still hold. The woman turned to him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Take your time," she said softly. "There is no rush. What matters is that you understand, that your decision comes from your heart and your respect for us." The protagonist nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for her patience and trust. That night, as he lay beneath the stars, he reflected on the journey so far. What had begun as a simple act of courage had grown into something far more complex, a lesson in culture, respect, and human connection. He understood that true bravery was not only about facing danger, but also about navigating the subtleties of trust, tradition, and morality. The offer had challenged him, not in a way of fear, but in a way that demanded empathy, understanding, and careful thought. And so, Part 3 concluded with a quiet tension. The protagonist had been offered something unexpected, something that carried the weight of tradition and gratitude. He did not yet know how he would respond, but he had begun to understand the depth of trust placed in him, the importance of respecting cultural values, and the responsibility that came with making a thoughtful choice. The story had moved from rescue to reflection, from survival to the challenge of navigating human relationships with care and wisdom. The following days were quiet, yet the protagonist felt a growing weight of reflection pressing on his mind. The woman's offer had been made, and he understood that his next actions required more than politeness. They required honesty, understanding, and a careful balance of respect for her culture and for his own moral compass. He woke each morning with the same thought lingering in his mind: how to honor the trust placed in him without causing harm or misunderstanding. He knew that rushing to a decision would dishonor the meaning behind her gesture. Patience, he reminded himself, was part of the journey. He continued his daily routines in the village, helping with chores and walking alongside the woman and her daughter. Each day provided moments of observation, reflection, and learning. He noticed small details: the way the villagers supported each other, how children learned from elders, and how traditions guided daily life. These observations were valuable. They were not just lessons about culture, but lessons about human connection, responsibility, and the impact of one's actions. The protagonist realized that every step he took carried weight, every word he spoke mattered, and every decision had consequences. In the evenings, when the sun dipped low behind the mountains, he would sit alone outside, looking up at the sky. The stars spread above him, countless points of light in the vast darkness. In these moments, he allowed himself to reflect deeply. He thought about his own life, the journeys that had brought him here, and the values he had always held. Courage, empathy, and respect had guided him before, and he knew they must guide him now. He thought about the woman and her daughter, the trust they had shown, and the responsibility he carried. He understood that this was more than a decision, it was a moral challenge, a test of understanding and integrity. He also spoke with elders in the village, seeking guidance. They shared stories of the past, explaining the symbolism of gestures like the one offered to him. He learned that the offer was not about obligation, but about recognition and respect. It was a way of saying, "We honor what you have done, and we place trust in you." This understanding helped him see the situation in a broader light. He realized that his role was not to accept or reject immediately, but to navigate the situation thoughtfully, showing care for everyone involved. During one of these conversations with an elder, the protagonist asked, "How can I show gratitude and respect without causing harm or misunderstanding?" The elder looked at him with quiet wisdom. "Listen, observe, and act with patience. Honor the intention behind the gesture, not just the gesture itself. Sometimes, the greatest respect is shown by understanding and careful reflection, not by action alone." The protagonist felt the truth in these words. It was not just about the act itself, but the respect and understanding he carried in his heart. Meanwhile, the bond between the woman and the protagonist continued to grow. They shared simple but meaningful moments, gathering food, walking along the trails, and sharing stories. She trusted him more each day, and he found himself drawn not only to her resilience, but also to her wisdom and thoughtfulness. Her daughter, too, began to see him as a kind presence, someone who treated her with respect, patience, and genuine care. He made a conscious effort to ensure that his actions would always reflect kindness and understanding, mindful that trust was fragile but precious. One afternoon, the woman spoke to him about her hopes for her daughter. "I want her to grow up surrounded by kindness, respect, and understanding," she said. "She must see that people can act with courage and integrity, even when faced with difficult choices." The protagonist listened, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that the offer she had made was tied to more than gratitude. It was tied to the hope for a future built on trust, care, and ethical consideration. He felt a deep responsibility to honor that hope in his decisions. In the quiet of the evening, he walked alone to the edge of the village, where the land stretched out into rugged hills and valleys. The wind carried the scents of earth and sage, and he breathed deeply, letting the calm of the land guide his thoughts. He considered the complexity of the situation, the culture he was learning to respect, and the values he wanted to uphold. He thought about what it meant to act with integrity, to honor trust without overstepping boundaries, and to navigate relationships with care. Each thought brought him closer to understanding what needed to be done. He also reflected on his feelings toward the woman and her daughter. There was a deep respect, a sense of gratitude for their trust, but he understood that respect did not mean obligation. He could show honor and appreciation without making a choice that might feel wrong or create confusion. He realized that true respect was demonstrated through thoughtfulness, patience, and understanding. It was not always about fulfilling a gesture, but about recognizing its meaning and acting with honesty and integrity. As the days passed, he carefully explained his reflections to the woman. He spoke softly, ensuring that she understood his intentions. "I value the trust you have placed in me," he said. "It is an honor, and I want to respect your culture and your family. At the same time, I must act in a way that aligns with my values. I hope you can understand my need to consider this carefully." She listened, her eyes steady and thoughtful, and finally nodded. "I understand," she replied. "Your honesty and respect are what matter most." That is what our traditions teach us, to honor intentions, not just actions. The protagonist felt a quiet relief. Their conversation had not solved everything, but it had created clarity. He understood that respect and gratitude could be expressed in ways that did not force decisions or obligations. The bond between them remained strong, built on honesty, understanding, and mutual care. He continued to help her and her daughter, participate in daily tasks, and learn about the culture. But now he also carried a deeper understanding of the responsibilities that came with trust. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the protagonist reflected on the lessons he had learned. Courage, empathy, and integrity were guiding principles in his life, but he realized that patience, reflection, and respect were equally important. He understood that the act of helping someone extended beyond the immediate moment. It created bonds, responsibilities, and moral challenges that required thoughtfulness. He felt grateful for the experience, knowing that it was shaping him in ways he had not anticipated. Before retiring for the night, he sat by the small fire near the woman's home, watching the daughter play quietly nearby. The woman joined him, and they shared a moment of peaceful conversation, reflecting on the day and their shared experiences. They laughed softly at small stories, and the warmth of the fire mirrored the warmth of their growing trust. The protagonist realized that he had come to understand not only her culture, but also the meaning of true responsibility and respect in human relationships. As he lay under the stars that night, the protagonist made a quiet promise to himself. He would continue to honor the trust placed in him, navigate the situation with care, and act with integrity. He would respect her culture, her family, and her daughter, while also staying true to his own values. He knew that his actions in the coming days would be important, but he also understood that reflection, patience, and empathy were equally vital. He had grown in understanding, not just of the culture around him, but of the depth of human connection, responsibility, and ethical choice. And so, Part 4 closed on a note of thoughtful reflection. The protagonist had not yet made a final decision regarding the offer, but he had begun to navigate the situation with wisdom, patience, and integrity. He understood the meaning behind the gesture, the weight of trust placed in him, and the importance of acting with respect. The story had evolved from a simple act of rescue to a complex journey of reflection, understanding, and moral growth. A journey that would soon lead to resolution and deeper appreciation of human connection. The following morning, the protagonist woke with a sense of quiet determination. He knew that the time had come to address the offer the woman had made days earlier. While he had spent much of the past week reflecting, learning, and observing, he now realized that clarity could only come through honest communication. The sun had just begun to rise, casting soft golden light over the village, and he felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. This was not simply a conversation. It was a moment that required careful words, patience, and empathy. He found the woman and her daughter outside their modest home. The girl was playing with small stones, stacking them carefully while the woman tended to a few household chores. The woman noticed his approach and smiled, a calm reassurance in her expression. "Good morning," she said. "Are you ready?" He nodded, understanding the subtlety in her tone. This was not a rush. It was an invitation to speak openly, honestly, and respectfully. They sat together under the shade of a large tree, the air warm but comfortable. The protagonist began slowly, choosing each word with care. "I have spent these past days learning, observing, and reflecting," he said. "I have tried to understand your culture, your traditions, and the meaning behind the offer you made. I am deeply grateful for your trust, and I honor the thought and respect that guided your gesture." He paused, letting his words settle. The woman listened quietly, her gaze steady, indicating that she understood the depth of what he was expressing. He continued, "At the same time, I must also honor my own values and my understanding of what is right. I cannot accept an offer that would create a situation I am not prepared for or that could cause confusion or discomfort. I hope you understand that my decision is not a rejection of your culture or your trust. It is an attempt to act with integrity and respect for all involved." The woman's eyes reflected thoughtfulness, and she nodded slowly. She could see that his words were sincere, thoughtful, and filled with genuine care. The protagonist explained further, "I want to honor the bond we have built, the trust you have placed in me, and the courage you have shown. There are other ways I can show my gratitude and respect, through continued support, friendship, and learning from your traditions. That is how I can truly honor your culture without creating misunderstandings or forcing choices that neither of us may be ready for." The woman's expression softened, and she smiled faintly. She could see that he had approached the matter with wisdom, patience, and empathy, qualities that were highly respected in her culture. After a quiet pause, the woman spoke. "I understand," she said gently. "You have thought carefully and acted with respect. That is what matters most. Your honesty and integrity show that you honor us in a meaningful way. In our traditions, this is even more important than accepting or declining an offer. You have shown the true meaning of respect, and that is the greatest gift you could give." The protagonist felt a quiet relief. The tension that had lingered over the past days was lifted, replaced with mutual understanding and renewed trust. They spent the rest of the morning walking along the village trails, engaging in simple tasks and enjoying each other's company. The daughter followed them, laughing as she tried to match the protagonist's careful steps along rocky paths. The atmosphere was light, filled with the warmth of shared trust and the comfort of understanding. For the protagonist, it was a reminder that human connection was not defined by gestures alone, but by the thought, care, and respect behind them. Throughout the day, he continued to observe and participate in village life. He noticed the small ways people showed gratitude and kindness to one another, helping with chores, sharing food, offering guidance, and showing patience. These actions were simple but powerful, reflecting values that transcended words. He realized that his experience with the woman and her daughter had taught him not only about cultural traditions, but also about the universal importance of respect, empathy, and ethical action. That evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, the protagonist and the woman sat together by a small fire. They reflected on the past week, the challenges they had faced, and the lessons they had learned. "I am grateful for your presence," the woman said quietly. "You have shown courage, patience, and understanding. You have honored us in a way that goes beyond any tradition." He nodded, feeling the depth of her words. He understood that the greatest recognition he could receive was not through ceremony or offer, but through acknowledgement of his character and actions. The protagonist also reflected on the changes within himself. He realized that helping someone went far beyond the immediate act of rescue. It was about the relationships formed, the trust earned, and the responsibility that followed. The experience had deepened his understanding of human nature, cultural diversity, and the importance of acting with integrity. He knew that he would carry these lessons with him for the rest of his life. In the following days, he continued to assist the woman and her family, strengthening bonds of trust and friendship. He helped with gathering food, tending small tasks, and learning more about the traditions and customs of the village. Each action was performed with care, respect, and humility. The daughter, once shy and reserved, began to approach him freely, laughing, asking questions, and sharing small stories from her life. The protagonist responded with patience and encouragement, fostering a safe and trusting environment. One morning, the woman invited him to join a small village gathering. It was a simple event, filled with music, storytelling, and shared meals. He observed carefully, noting the subtle ways people expressed gratitude, honor, and respect. He realized that gestures of trust and recognition could take many forms, and that understanding their meaning required observation, reflection, and empathy. The experience reinforced the lesson he had learned over the past week. Respect was not simply about action, but about intention and understanding. The protagonist also spent time teaching small skills he had learned on his journeys: how to navigate terrain safely, how to build small shelters, and how to observe changes in weather. The villagers appreciated his knowledge, not as an imposition, but as a contribution to their shared life. The woman watched, her eyes reflecting quiet approval and trust. Through this exchange, he realized that relationships were built on mutual learning and support, and that trust and respect were strengthened through shared experiences rather than grand gestures alone. As the days passed, the protagonist prepared to continue his journey beyond the village. He had spent a significant amount of time learning, helping, and building trust, but he knew that it was time to move forward. He sat with the woman and her daughter one last evening under the stars, reflecting on the bond they had formed. "I will always remember this place, your trust, and the lessons I have learned," he said softly. "You have shown me the meaning of courage, respect, and integrity. I am grateful beyond words." The woman nodded, her expression calm and filled with understanding. Before leaving, the woman gave him a small woven token, a gift of respect and remembrance. "This is to remember our time together and the trust we shared," she said. "Carry it with you as a reminder of what matters most: honesty, courage, and respect." He accepted it with gratitude, understanding that this simple gesture held more meaning than any formal offer could. It was a symbol of mutual respect, trust, and shared humanity. The next morning, he set out along the trail, the sun rising over the mountains and casting golden light across the land. The village slowly faded behind him, but the lessons he had learned and the bonds he had formed remained. He felt a profound sense of fulfillment, not from material reward, but from the knowledge that his actions had made a difference, that trust had been honored, and that respect had been shown. The journey ahead would continue, but he carried with him the wisdom of patience, empathy, and cultural understanding. As he walked, he reflected on the journey from the moment he first encountered the woman in distress. What had begun as a simple act of rescue had grown into a story of trust, respect, and learning. He understood that courage was not only about facing danger, but about navigating relationships, understanding cultures, and acting with integrity. The offer, once a source of tension and uncertainty, had become a lesson in patience, wisdom, and ethical choice. By the time he reached the edge of the village, the sun was high in the sky. He paused for one last look back, seeing the woman and her daughter tending to their home. He waved quietly, and they waved in return. There were no grand ceremonies, no formal celebrations, but the silent acknowledgement of trust, respect, and shared humanity spoke louder than words ever could. He continued on his journey, carrying the memory of their bond and the lessons of courage, integrity, and cultural understanding with him. And so, the story concluded with a quiet resolution. The protagonist had honored the trust placed in him, navigated a complex cultural situation with wisdom and care, and built a lasting connection rooted in respect, empathy, and shared understanding. What began as an act of bravery had evolved into a journey of reflection, learning, and personal growth, a journey that demonstrated the power of human connection, the importance of cultural respect, and the value of acting with integrity in every decision.